Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines, and today I have the honor of talking to Jon Peck. So I saved this because I don't want to embarrass him too much earlier, but so my background mostly is in statistics. In the last 5 to 8 years I've been doing automation, but I come from using SPSS. I started using SPSS back in around 98, I think. And that was, if I remember right, version 9. And actually I was gonna do this as a joke to show you, like, I still actually rely on 13 a lot because 13 was just a solid, version. It just doesn't handle Unicode. But anyway, so I've been following Jon's stuff. He's been posting things forever, and like I can't tell you how many times his code has saved me, either directly where he answered a question of mine or indirectly where he had solved someone else's problem and I got to use it. So again, thank you so much, Jon, for doing this. And actually, why don't you go into and tell us a bit of your background with work in SPSS?
Okay, well, I got my bachelor's degree in mathematics from Oberlin and a PhD from Yale in economics. And then I taught mostly econometrics for 13 years after that. But what I really wanted to do was software, particularly statistical software. And so I left the university and joined a software company, which happened to be SPSS. And then I stayed there for 32, 33 years until I retired at the end of 2015. The last 6 years, I was what I call an involuntary IBM employee because IBM bought SPSS.
Right.
Point.
Yeah.
And so that was my only experience really working for a big corporation.
Yeah.
My very first experience with computers was on an early second generation IBM computer, a 1401, a summer job working for a big insurance company, programming in Fortran 1 and machine code. And most of their computers were vacuum tube computers at that point.
That's awesome.
So then when I was a junior in college, they got their first digital computer. And I fell in love with that and was totally hooked. I probably would have failed out if they'd had it when I was a freshman. But I was very dedicated to that.
Yeah.
Went on, I probably would have gone on in computer science if it had not been tied to electrical engineering in those days. And then, as I said, I went as an academic for many years, and I did a lot of computer work while I was still there, but it wasn't what the university was about at that point. And so when I joined SPSS, I got to do everything. I joined actually right at the beginning of the PC era, and I was part of the team that built the first PC product for SPSS. I wrote the first C code that SPSS ever shipped. It was a wild time because bringing big software, mainframe scale software, to work on little PCs was a real challenge, and the tools were not what you'd hope for at that point. We had to make our first version of SPSS PC run in 320K of memory. So this took a lot of doing. So I did a lot of architectural work on that. I did the user interface for it. I did some statistical methods for it. I got to do really everything. And over time, I designed user interfaces. I did statistical algorithms. I did other kinds of, a lot of syntax design and syntax worked with users over time. So I really had an opportunity to do pretty much everything outside of marketing and sales, although I would go on sales calls occasionally.
Oh, yeah.
But mostly that wasn't what I did. So,
that was the one, because I'm kind of done working in a corporate world. I just couldn't handle it anymore. But the one thing I did think about doing was being like a sales, a technical sales guy, because I get what businesses need. And I'm techie enough that I can, answer how things could be done. But that did cross my, because to me, it's fun, right? You're solving their problems. You're helping them understand how your thing can help fix what they're doing. And it's a kind of a creative process too.
Yeah, and it works both ways. I mean, I felt going out on customer calls or occasionally going out and training people on certain topics was really good feedback
Sure.
for what's good about the software, what's bad about the software, what can we do better.
Right.
And so I did more of that in my last years, even before the IBM acquisition, because we were doing a lot of new stuff. But it was a very important part of thinking about what to do with the software.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I wanted to touch on just real quickly, because a lot of people who will be watching this, my background, like I said, is I did statistics for a long time, but the stuff I've been making videos about is mostly automation. So a lot of people that'll at least be watching it from the automation side won't understand. When you say I think you said you taught econometrics for 13 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Like, just so everyone understands, like econometrics isn't like, oh, I just taught econometrics, right? I mean, it's a really advanced topic. So I like I said, it was one of the funnest things I ever did was doing stuff in econometrics, because wow, it's really complicated. And yet you can do some amazing, it allows you to really start understanding what effect certain things have on, when you control for other things, including because of time series too, and seasonality and, anyway, it's a fun topic, but I didn't realize you had such a strong background in statistics as well. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that was kind of why I joined the statistics company. It came down to accepting an offer from SPSS or one from SAS. And I decided eventually that SPSS in Chicago was better for me than SAS. And as it turned out, in SPSS, I had the freedom to do work in many different areas, which I probably wouldn't have had at SAS.
Yeah. I was using, before I used SPSS, I was using Systat. And then I used SPSS. And then when I got my master's at Georgia and master's in market research. And so they also taught us SAS. So when I was there, I did all my homework assignments on Systat, SPSS, and SAS. So I could see how they all, of course, do the same thing, right? But it was the output that would differ, and how you'd basically take your results and then want to put them into a report. And that was where, hands down, SPSS was so much easier at taking your results and grabbing what you want and either graphing it or doing whatever. And that's what I absolutely loved about it.
Yeah, and SPSS bought Systat.
But then didn't they get on their own again at some point?
Eventually, they sold it off. Lee Wilkinson and I had offices opposite each other.
Really?
At SPSS, and so after the Systat acquisition, so that was an interesting experience.
If you happen to ever talk to him, so this is my book. It won't. This is the book I learned, even though I had a lot of courses on it, but I worked through every page, everything in this book multiple times. Actually, this one isn't it. I have several copies of it, but one of them is like, it's falling apart because I worked through it so many times. And he did a great job of teaching a complex thing for the most part. And here's what you should look at. This is what matters. Here's what things are, here's our rule of thumb, which is a lot of stat books don't have, of like, this is where you got to worry about collinearity, and this is where it's okay, and here's how you diagnose. Anyway, I loved the book. So let me go on. Let me talk to you a little bit about how I got into, because the reason why I reached out to you was I loved, that's what got me into programming was I was a director of research at Six Flags, and I got brought in with my predecessor was leaving, and she said, oh, by the way, we have this guest satisfaction survey, and this is what I do. Every Monday, I get the results from the last week from the guest satisfaction survey, and Monday through Thursday, I work on creating these tables, and then for the 22 parks, I think it was 22 parks, I create these reports, and then Friday, I email them out like Friday morning, and then I have a half a day on Friday to actually do other stuff. Right. And like, it's every week. That's what she did. And I'm like, there's no way I'm not going to do that. So I had, at that point, I had taken a class in macros, but I hadn't really applied them a lot. And so I said, I'm going to figure out a way to automate doing my reports with syntax and macros. And I'll tell you, like, it's one thing I learned about myself is that I don't give up, because I had no one to ask. And I mean, I could try to do something online, but still, it was, it was very specific in what I was doing. And so I would spend like a day I was nesting macros inside macros. And it was for me, because I wasn't a programmer. It was really confusing, but I finally worked through it. And, but I got it down to where I could come in the morning, get the file, and, run my program, and it would do all the reporting, create all the Excel files, and then actually save them all into separate Excel files, and then write the emails and attach the emails and send them to the right groups of people, because it was also really confusing on who got what. But that was all done like in 10 minutes, and I didn't do any work, right? It just did it all. And it was,
when the PC era began, and SPSS at that point was all syntax.
Yeah.
And
when was that? I'm sorry. When was that?
Well, the first version of SPSS PC was like 1984 or so.
Okay.
It was the first serious statistical software on the PC, as far as I know. And it, of course, it didn't have a GUI interface. There wasn't such a thing at the time. Although I actually designed a character mode kind of multi-window system that people pretty much liked. When Windows came along, the world was really tired of syntax, tired of that sort of stuff, and dialog boxes and menus and the real GUI was all the rage.
Yeah.
And so SPSS put a huge amount of work into the first Windows product, which was Windows 3 or so. It was pretty primitive Windows, but it was it lifted a lot of the constraints on memory usage and things that were a big struggle with the character mode PC product. But everybody wanted to point and click. Everybody was thrilled that they could stop using syntax.
Yeah.
But all the dialogues in SPSS had a little paste button, and the paste button would generate syntax.
Bless you for that paste button. That's all I got to say is I do the vast majority of my work in syntax, but often I'll still go to the GUI and get that template and then tweak the syntax. So anyway, it's so helpful.
Absolutely, and in fact, even when you push the OK button, it generates the syntax and sends it to the back end for execution. The front end, in fact, that was how we got there. We said the back end is syntax only. We're going to build a GUI system that feeds it. So we generated all the syntax from that. And to this day, there are lots of people who use the GUI as a way to get a start on the syntax, to generate something.
Yeah.
And of course, they do that for a couple of reasons. One reason is because it's easier to generate it that way. But if you're going to run that job every Monday morning, you don't want to point and click your way through it every morning. And the other reason is if you want proof or you really want a record of what you did,
absolutely.
When someone comes back and says, this number looks funny, being able to go back and look at the syntax that ran, or maybe to tweak it a little and run it again without going through the whole process is really important. And so being able to, there was always a journal file in the background, which people tended not to know about, and so on. But having a record and having something which was repeatable was great. Now, of course, then besides the syntax, you wanted some flexibility, and the macro facility provided some flexibility. But it was kind of like the C preprocessor. It was something that would go through and generate syntax before it looked at the data, before it did anything like that. And so you could feed parameters that way. You had some ability to handle conditionals and other looping and other kind of standard programming language constructs. I've always actually hated the macro facility. Although it's designed to kind of look like regular SPSS syntax, and SPSS users, at least when they get to be a little more advanced, are fairly comfortable with it. It's really not what you want in the modern era. What you want is something much more like a scripting language, something that's much more dynamic, something that lets you make decisions based on, say, looking at the variable dictionary or looking at measurement levels of variables, things you couldn't do with the macro facility. And so that led us in, I guess, version 14, we introduced Python as a scripting language within statistics. And we beefed that up in several subsequent releases. And it provided a huge amount of additional capability at the cost of asking you to learn a programming language that you were probably not familiar with. And SPSS users typically are not programmers. But we did that and by the time we got to, I guess, version 18, we had not only a full-fledged and broad API for Python with statistics, but we also had a way to do custom dialog boxes so that people could do point and click and generate Python code as well as generating SPSS code. Python code would run SPSS, but you didn't have to know any Python to use it. And then we added R in version, I think version 16 or 17. We added support for R and beefed that up over a couple of years. And we actually added some Java support around version 21. And there was still some basic scripting left. So, you know, the most popular programming languages were available to you. You could use what you like. And that, you know, between those languages, mostly Python and R. I don't think the Java interface has actually ever gotten much use except inside IBM. You know, IBM had a lot of Java programmers, and they wanted to be able to use Java to control SPSS, which they did, but I don't hear much about it. But so anyway, one of the key things that these well, they let you do two kinds of things. One was to really automate what you were doing and in a flexible way, and to build stuff that would really take away the pain of generating that weekly report. I mean, nobody who is a data scientist or a statistician or a data analyst or whatever you want to call them signs up to be that because they like to tweak syntax manually and generate reports and copy and paste stuff into Excel and do that kind of drudgery. And that's error prone as well as incredibly boring. So we added a lot of capabilities to automate that kind of thing and automate it in a really flexible way. And so that's kind of one dimension of, basically making it easier to use the capabilities that are in SPSS. The other dimension, and this was particularly true with R, say, was the ability to push out and add statistical methods that might not be built into SPSS.
Cool.
So,
yeah.
Over the course of my last, 6 or 8 years at SPSS and IBM, I wrote maybe 100 procedures that would do both kind of automation and statistical pain relieving kinds of things and more sophisticated or elaborate statistical methods that were not available as built-in features. It's not just me who can do it. Basically, these are all open APIs. So anybody can write stuff to do this kind of thing and have these capabilities. And now, over time, it took a while, especially with IBM, it was hard to get IBM to understand open source.
Oh, I can't imagine. Sure, yeah.
Well, they actually had open source activities going on in various places, but both Python and R, of course, are open source. R is EPL licensed, which is an extra challenge for commercial software because it contaminates possibly your proprietary code if you aren't careful. But nevertheless, with open APIs and with using languages that are widely known, all of a sudden, anybody who had some basic programming skills could do things that they never could do before with SPSS.
So incidentally, and we didn't talk about this, but so AutoHotkey, the scripting language that I use all the time, it has COM you can connect it through COM, and so SPSS has a COM interface. It's one of those few things that aren't Microsoft, but they have a COM interface. And so I had actually played with AutoHotkey to automate stuff in SPSS, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. I could do some things. I never did all my analysis with it, but it was like, oh, this is neat. If I wanted to, I could drive SPSS with it. Actually,
Yeah.
so, and I think if I remember right, you might have even chimed in on this reply, because I think I posted a question about using regular expressions, and I think you said that was one of those extensions or something that you had module or something that you had created. But
Yeah, I would do that in Python. The Python regular has a full regular expression capability,
yeah,
which is really useful.
yeah,
And I remember that COM interface. Of course, the problem with that is that was Windows only, and
oh, sure, yeah,
Mac and Linux,
right,
and the COM interface was always kind of difficult from the engineering point of view, to make it work. It worked okay. We had some basic scripting, that is basic the language scripting capabilities, but those APIs were more limited, and the COM interface didn't really touch a lot of important parts of the system, things you just couldn't do or couldn't do very conveniently with COM. So it pretty much, I don't know whether anybody uses it anymore.
yeah, I'd be surprised.
It was there, and
I actually had an interview with someone he's over in Australia, and he also uses SPSS and he uses AutoHotkey. And so I was talking to him, and I said, yeah, actually in SPSS, I also had it set up where I would use, I think it's the host command. I could call executables from within SPSS to launch. That's how I zipped my files and wrote the emails and stuff, as I would call other programs from inside SPSS. And but he was like, you did what? But yeah, it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to something, and you really want to be lazy. It's like, I want to do everything I can to not have to work on this.
Yeah, the host command opens up a lot of possibilities, but it also causes problems. We had customers who were very security conscious and did not want to allow their users to get at OS capabilities.
Yeah.
So we had to have, particularly for the server version, the ability to disable the host command.
Interesting. Yeah.
And Swiss banks, places like that, were paranoid about what might be running on their systems. Did not like having that. But there are places clearly where it's really useful. Now, of course, you can get to the equivalent facilities now with Python code inside SPSS, because Python can access operating system capabilities.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the host command was one of those things where it kind of contributed in some ways to make SPSS too powerful.
Yeah, I was learning Python for about 2 years, and I did enough where I got okay with it. But then I would try to do something in Python, and I wasn't using it. Actually, my friend and I, Gabriel, I mentioned earlier, Gabriel Cook, we actually spent we called them codecations. We would take a week off or so from work, and we always get together and we would study. We would pick a topic and study it. And so we worked like 15-hour days trying to learn something, in coding. And so one trip was, let's switch from SPSS to using Python for our statistical analysis. And this was about maybe 6 years ago. And Python wasn't there at all. I mean, we couldn't. There are a lot of the tests just in the things that we were finding. We weren't writing libraries, of course, right? We're just using other people's stuff, and it wasn't there. And R also, he has played with R a lot. I haven't, but it also was like, I didn't realize how just the data view in SPSS, that ease of looking at your data and sorting it, and selecting data and then going back and looking at it, it's really well designed and works solid. And like that in Python and R, that's not an easy thing, that's not readily available.
Well, both Python and R are programming languages.
Yeah.
And that that's power. It gives you a lot of power. I wish that SPSS syntax actually had more power as a programming language, but at the same time, it's a challenge, particularly with R, because R is I used to interview job candidates, like
Yeah.
statisticians, or people with, who we call them data scientists now.
Yeah.
And I would ask them, like, what's your preference? Do you like Python or R better, and why? And a lot of these people would say, oh, gee, they're kind of about the same, aren't they? And they're like night and day.
Yeah.
Python is a really compact, elegant language with fewer dark corners than any programming language I've ever used, and I've probably used 40 of them in my career. R is the extreme opposite. If there's one Python, the theory in Python is there should be really one elegant way of doing something.
To do it, yeah.
R, there'll be 100 ways of doing it, and they'll all be a little different, and they'll all be quirky, and they'll all have kind of odd features to
Yep.
them. And so I
I went through that phase.
Yeah.
Auto hotkey is that way. It has a lot of ways, like to do loops and do this and that. And then Python, there's the one way. And at first I thought it was constraining, but then I realized I learned the one way, and it was like, I just have to learn one way. And it was like, I saw the beauty of it after a while, after I got used to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Python is my favorite programming language ever. R gives you access to a lot of statistical capabilities that Python is catching up on now, but which is by no means comparable in terms of scope. There are currently in the R CRAN library, last count I saw, there are over 13,000 packages there. So of course, your first problem is, how would I even find the package I wanted to use?
Yeah.
It's difficult, but nevertheless, the two languages are wildly different. They both have real strengths. And so, if I were going to go pick needing to implement an esoteric statistical algorithm, I'd probably look at R first. If I wanted to do something that was more, maybe not so statistical, but really allowed me to do something interesting with automation and so on, I would look at Python first. And then, of course, I would use Python often to generate SPSS syntax to do stuff. And one of the ideals, one of the hopes I had, which I think has not really been fully realized with all this automation capabilities, is for people who do surveys. Typically, a survey researcher will have a questionnaire some sort or some kind of data input like that maybe coming, and they will, and they'll use it repeatedly, or there'll be minor variations. So, it will have some, maybe a couple of extra questions added for somebody, and so they find themselves taking their syntax job that's processing this and having to tweak it and make another syntax job that's kind of almost the same. And the most extreme example of this that I have ever seen is I consulted with a country in Europe that basically did all of their statistical analysis with SPSS, and they had built up a collection of 250,000 jobs that they ran with SPSS.
Wow.
Totally out of control. But and most of it was because they had taken something and tweaked it a little, and then, or maybe added something, or and they had totally lost control of this. But so one of the things that I have harped on over the years is, how do you generalize a job? Take a job that's basically going to process a survey, for example, and make it capable of processing variations on that survey without having to change anything. Yeah. And so, one of the things we introduced, started in version 13, was custom variable attributes. You could make up your own properties for variables, like maybe important variable, or reliable, or unreliable, or confidential, or anything you wanted. Have that be managed by SPSS, and then be able to write jobs at a higher level, typically using Python. So that guy who's doing, or that company that's doing similar surveys over time, maybe they've classified their variables. They've got demographic variables, there's economic variables, say. And what they want to do is a standard set of tables for all their demographic variables. Well, if you've added one more variable, then you got to go in there and, tweak the syntax. But using both custom attributes and the built-in properties, like the measurement level of variables, you could write a job that was general enough that it would automatically tabulate all your demographic variables. And so you really take a lot of the drudge work out of it, and you reduce the probability of error. And being able to do that kind of, even data validation and so on, being able to generalize those jobs, you get down from 250,000 jobs to, I don't know how many, but a small fraction of that, and you don't keep copying and tweaking.
So I have Survey Gizmo as a tool I'll use for surveys, and I actually used to publish articles for them, and so I have an account I use with them anyway. They have an API for getting your data, and their data, like any other, when you get data, especially they export to SPSS, but when you get data files like that, the names of the variables and everything, it's not ideal. Let's put it that way. But they have an API where you can look at the questionnaire as well, right? And so I'm working with a friend of mine. He's doing the actual coding part of it because he's much more advanced than me, but I understand what the data file should look like. And so we're connecting the API to build our own data set and make it beautiful. And then I was like, hey, you know what? A lot of these, like the multi-select questions, I know they're going to be a 0-1. I know the statistical thing I'm going to do on that. Like anything that's a multi-select question, this is what I do. And then if it's a frequency, and the only ones I need are a few to say, is it a rank order question? That I don't think I can easily detect versus just a frequency. But I'm like, with just asking a couple questions, you export the data file to say, do you want to use, and then actually, what are when you think of crosstabs, what are my banners going to be, and what do I want to do with my dependent variables? I'm like, I can ask a couple questions and basically generate all the syntax for the reporting, right, that they would possibly, at least theoretically want, and it'll be done automatically, right, with just a little couple questions at the beginning saying, which of these variables do you want to have as a banner, and then which ones do you want to have as your dependents, and a couple of things. And I'm like, this is going to save an amazing amount of time, besides just naming the variables much closer to what they actually represent, the question number and the question that was asked, not the crazy stuff they put in them. But I hear you. I'm excited. It's taken us a while, but we're getting there.
The custom attributes, this reminds me, a good place you can do things like put the question text in as a custom attribute, or the interviewer instructions. Or other properties that don't fit very well as variable labels because they're probably too long. Maybe not the way you want to present it anyway, but you want to have that as part of your data. A lot of market research companies outsource their data collection and preparation of the data files. And so, what I would often advise customers to do is, these guys that you've outsourced it to, tell them they need to add this custom metadata to it when they are preparing a save file or preparing a data file for you. So when you get it, you're ready to go. You have these questions that you're talking about already answered up to a point, and then you can do the processing in a much more efficient way and automate this stuff. I'm just working with a company actually in Vietnam that gets outsourced work for, I don't even know who they work for. They doing stuff, and they're getting into programmability and getting into this stuff so that they can, increase their library of kind of standard processing techniques without having to do the kind of syntax tweaking and manual work that people used to do.
Man, now I forgot. I was thinking of something to say. It was really smart too. No, so thinking about it, I'm just curious if you have any. And actually, I remember we we exchanged, this is like 10 years ago at least, probably longer. We exchanged a couple, I don't think they were emails, I think they were posts on some forum somewhere. But I was trying to get to is like, out of all the SPSS users out there, right? Like what percent, use syntax out of all of those? Like, do you have any idea? I get the feeling it's pretty low.
I think that you have to divide the users into at least two groups. A lot of people are learning basic statistics. They're students. They're getting started in this stuff, or they're sociologists or economics students. They're going to do this stuff, but they're doing it in the learning process. Those people are mostly going to use the point and click interface. There's no point in them really learning syntax. Sometimes I hear people say, well, statistical software shouldn't be too easy to use because, you need to
apply your brain.
To use it. I think that's stupid. I don't think the complexity of the software has anything to do with the complexity of the statistics.
Fair enough.
Nevertheless, a lot of those people are point and click people, and that's just fine. People who are where this is their career, or they're professional analysts, or they're people who are doing repetitive tasks, doing that weekly or monthly report. A lot of those people are using syntax, and they may use the dialog boxes or in the new interface. The internet.
Like I said, I do, right? I do use it occasionally.
I do too. I mean, I've been, designing and working with this stuff for many decades, and I still often start with a dialog box to give me, the first cut on something, and then tweak it. And so I think there's a significant fraction of people who do depend on syntax. If you ask the question the other way around, if you took away the ability to use syntax, what would you do to the user base? I think, you would demolish it. You would become, an elementary package, and you wouldn't. And of course, the GUI the GUI doesn't cover everything, particularly complex data management stuff. You still have to do that directly in syntax, and you might not even get a start on it. But nevertheless, it's a key factor for a lot of people, even if they don't really like using syntax. We used to have as the syntax editor really just a plain text editor. It didn't give you really any help. And we heard a lot of complaints that people wanted more intelligent syntax processing. And so just based on that, we added a lot of smarts to the syntax editor, and we hear that that's important to people. So it's still, I couldn't tell you what the percentage of people who use syntax is, but a lot of people use it at least some of the time. And by pasting it, it gets color coded now and error checked, and it's not so painful as it used to be. In fact, I was helping someone this morning where she needs to do something with regression that happens not to be supported in the dialog box. It should be, but it isn't. And so, she's going to have to confront a little bit of syntax to get what she wants. And then it will do exactly what she wants, and it will be simple syntax, but she couldn't paste it.
Hey, I got a quick story for you that I think you'll appreciate and laugh at, because like you said, sort of when I worked for Department of Defense agencies for a while, and I was their guy that when they would have people they were interviewing for stat positions, so not statisticians, but just people who supposedly could do statistics, I was the person that would interview them, and usually like in 3 minutes I could tell if someone really knew what they were doing or just had it on their resume, right? But what was funny was during these interviews, I'd hear a lot of people say, oh, well, I did multivariate, blah, 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 statistic, regression, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, almost anyone who says they do multivariate regression is wrong. They don't. I'm like, it's almost all, it's multiple regression, fine. Virtually no one uses multivariate regression. I was saying this for years, right? in that book I showed you from Leland's book, right? He talks about partialing out the residuals, right? Which is how I dealt with collinearity and finding if there were issues and controlling and, well, holding one thing constant and understanding the relationship with the other ones. And so I did it all in Systat. And then I finally, because I use it so much, I wrote a macro in SPSS. And it was only when I wrote the macro in SPSS did I realize, ironically, that I was doing multivariate regression. I just thought it was so funny. It was like, all these years I say nobody uses it. And like, it's the one thing I always go to when I have a complex model and want to understand the relationship between things and holding something else constant. But yeah, macros, that was the other one is any idea on what % of people use macros? Because I think it's really rare, has been my experience. But I'm sure you talk with much higher level people using SPSS than what I'm talking to.
Yeah, well, there are a relatively small number of people who really use macro. But my campaign has been to stamp it out and get people to use Python or R instead.
Yeah.
Because they're so much friendlier and they're so much more powerful. And the barrier, of course, is, hey, Python is not SPSS.
Yeah.
One of the things I didn't mention before when we were talking about this is when we first introduced the Python and then the R options, we were hoping that lots of people would take this up and write code that they could then distribute to other people. They would share. That hasn't happened as much as we hoped. A lot of people do actually write such code, but they write it for themselves. And so they don't share it. But we added the notion of extension commands. I guess we added that. Well, we started in 16, but it matured in version 18. And it was, the idea was to make it easy to create stuff that looked like regular SPSS syntax, but happened to be implemented in Python or R. And now if you look at what's available from the extensions menu in current SPSS versions, you'll find some procedure. It probably has a custom dialog box so you can point and click. But if you paste the syntax from it, it looks like built-in syntax. So you can, anybody, if they understand regular syntax, they can use this without even knowing that it's implemented in Python or R. And so that spreads the use of those capabilities a lot and really reduces the barrier to use that people might have otherwise had to learn Python or R to use. Even in the syntax editor, those commands have help. You can paste a custom command that SPSS doesn't know anything about, press F1, and it will give you the syntax help for it. Again, it's this issue of how much do people really have to learn in order to take advantage of advanced capabilities. The idea is to make it as little as possible and still make it easy for people to create something that they share, and that they can share with people and just say, here, just use this.
Yeah, I think early on, because I know my friend Gabriel Cook, he because he has colleagues that he would share code with. And initially, and I think it's gotten a lot better now, but initially when Python first started coming into it, there were issues with what version of Python they had installed with SPSS and getting it to run right, and it was really problematic for him, and so that was why he didn't do it. But for me, I have macros. I mean, I can show you. I have hundreds of syntax and macros things that I wrote 15 years ago. They still work, right? So I'm just a believer if it already works, I'm not going to mess with it. But I understand your point of actually. So a couple of days ago, I was working. I had this report. I try not to do statistics anymore, but some of my clients still give me stuff, and I'm like, I can't say no to money, right? I'm like, it's good money, okay. It's just so. But I'm trying to make it fun for myself. So they wanted these banners. And so I love the custom tables in SPSS. They're amazing what you can do, right? They're so flexible. But I had never done a good job creating a macro that would allow me to just say, what are my banners? and then what are the rows, and then go to town and just crank it all out. Because I had to update my macro. It was one of the head tail loop thing, and that stung in my brain earlier when you talked about how you can't easily access a lot of stuff in the macro language the way you can in like Python or something. Because also, actually, after I wrote it all, I love using the whole let's get the first one and last one and use 2 in between, and like it won't work with that. And I was like, okay, I have to list every variable here. But I hear you. I might take another. I keep always thinking that like my SPSS career, is done, but it's. I don't think it's ever going away. So I might as well see if I can adapt some of my stuff to be smarter.
One of the extension commands that I wrote that I like the best is called SPSS Inc. Select Variables.
Oh yeah.
It allows you to construct a list of variables using the metadata or patterns in the names and things like that. And you can choose the separator that you want between those names. So you can use that to generate your variable list for custom tables and use it to generate the table subcommand, X plus Y plus Z, what have you, that you might need to put in that table expression. And you can automate that, as we were talking before, with either the built-in metadata like measurement level or variable names or patterns in names, or even custom attributes are accessible from there. So you can really, and custom tables, of course, does have tremendous amount of flexibility in there. But the syntax is, I think, is simpler than the old tables procedure. There's still some people who disagree. But,
I was amazed it got changed. Like I realized my initial macro stopped working the same way. It still would run, but the output changed, and I had to tweak it. But I honestly didn't even notice. I didn't pay attention to what actually changed. I just got it to work. I was just surprised. Like it had been a long time where it was the same, and then suddenly I noticed something slight. I don't know what it was, but obviously it changed.
The C tables procedure, which replaced the old tables procedure, was a from bottom up rewrite, and it has some similar capabilities, but it does much more than the old tables procedure could ever do. But we really tackled the syntax to say, how do we make this really rational? How do we get rid of exceptions and weird stuff and make it as clean as possible? And then, there's still some places where it probably could be improved, but it really replaced the old table. The old tables procedure is still buried in there. You could still run it, and we provided a converter to create C table syntax from the old table syntax. But it was hard because you used to have to do a lot of data preparation steps before the old tables procedure to get it to do something that really ought to have been in the procedure. And so, the converter could never be completely successful. Nevertheless, C table is another one that I'm very proud of that we did. I think that was like in 11.5 when C table.
Oh wow! Okay.
Long time ago.
Well, was there recently like this last version? Maybe not the last version. The one before this last version. I don't remember what number we're up to. Is it 24 or 25?
It was a big improvement. Big enhancement in version 24. The current version, well, it's kind of confusing now. Current version is sort of 25 or subscription or the new interface. So there are kind of several new versions floating around. But one thing we did was one of my last things that I worked on before I retired from IBM was let's look at the kind of enhancements, what we really could do to C tables. And we added a whole bunch of stuff there that tend, for the most part, is kind of more statistically sophisticated than simple tabulation. We added confidence intervals for all the statistics.
Oh wow, cool.
We added effective base weighting, which for surveys that are not random samples is generally more accurate than the frequency weights that were available before. We added other multiple hypothesis testing methods. Besides, you could do a Bonferroni correction,
Yeah.
but we added another one that works. It's a little less conservative and works better in when you have a lot of variables or a lot of tests that you're doing.
Yeah.
We added the ability to put the significance levels from the tables procedure into the main table automatically rather than having to use, a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That was a big boost in capabilities in 24. That was done, we did, a lot of that was, things that I knew we should do, but we also talked to a lot of customers and we had partners who were saying, these are things I need in that procedure. Yeah. Can't do. Like one of the ones that was biggest surprise to me was one of our biggest customers said, I really need to have tests at 2 different significance levels in the same table.
Wow.
I want to do a 5% and a 10% test.
Wow.
That would never have occurred to me. And they said, without that, we can't use this new version.
Wow.
We put it in. It was direct customer request. And as far as I know, they're happy with it. But you can also do cool things with that now. You can do you can do the significance flags in the main table, and then you can use one of our custom extension commands to color code them, like highlight all the cells that are in yellow.
I did that on I used scripts to go back and color code things, and it was awesome. The other thing, by the way, I wrote, it worked in the version 13, but I never adapted it to after 21. But is the Anova table, when using like the means test and have an Anova table, the significance testing is all down below and you have to jump back and forth, right? So what I did was I didn't care about the overall average. So I used scripts to bring up the significance testing up into that top table. And so it was all right there, and it was like magical because it was so much easier to skim and just see the significance testing right there, and that was one, like, I can't tell you how much time it took me to do that, but it was one I would love to have in it. I think anybody would like have that as an option of having it as an extra column right there and make it so much easier, because when you have 3 it doesn't matter, but when you got like 30 variables it's really hard to look at.
One of the things that I worked a lot on is ways of basically syntax-driven extensions for manipulating output tables. So there is a merge tables extension command that allows you essentially to do a join between 2 tables. And there's another one that is called table calc that allows you to take a table and do calculations on the cells in that table and add those results in various places into the table. So it allows even from another table to go take something and stick it into a table. So it allows you to really do very complicated or extensive modification of the output or hide stuff. Maybe, I hear from people periodically, they run frequencies a lot, but they really don't want the cumulative percents in the table they're going to use. And so they have to go in and manually hide them. Well, they can do that with syntax and have it, again, remove the drudgery, make it do what they want and automate that. So that's a huge time saver.
I recently, you'll laugh, but because I just don't pay attention to a lot, because I just do things the way I've been doing them forever, right? But I saw what's that?
You and the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. I'm guilty, definitely. But I saw the style button on a table, and so I'm like, well, let me look at this. And holy cow, once I played with it, it allowed me to do a lot of what you're saying. And so I built some of those default ones. It will go back and adjust everything, make some big corrections for me. And I was stoked because those were other ones I had in my SACS basic scripts. And that was when I remember, this was still like 10 years ago when SACS Basic stopped being the default. Maybe it wasn't 10 years ago, but SACS Basic stopped being the default scripting language, and it was right in when switching to Python and what's the other one, the basic, right?
It was WinRat basic. They were all the same thing, basically.
Okay, but I remember saying like basically a lot of my scripts stopped working, and and it was also because at the time you guys, or at least the version that I was using, got rid of the global. Was it the global or the auto?
No, the global's SBS file. It was
And
still there, but you had to go get it, kind of.
well, I had tied in like select last table, so I had subroutines in that one, and then anyway, so it was a mess for me, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just not going to deal with it. I'm going to stick with the early version, but yeah, that was anyway. You I had asked you why they stopped working, and you're like, no, they should still work fine. And anyway, that was a long time ago too. I remember specifically.
There's an interesting story about that style capability that was added.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things, one of the other virtues of extension commands and programmability. I created a very powerful extension command called SPSS modify tables that allows you to do practically anything to a table. But it was an extension command, and it wasn't the easiest thing to use because the dialogue is a little complicated because it wasn't a way to really expose that in a simpler way as we liked. But what we did is, we saw what people were doing with that, and we said, okay, now let's make a extension command, a built-in command, not an extension command, that provides the main capabilities that people are using with the modify tables command. So it provides a little bit of market research. Here's something, we see people using it, we see people like it, we see people like it. We just said the other thing, maybe we should make it a built-in command. So that's happened in a number of cases, but that's one of the most extreme ones. And why did that one, it still is not as powerful as the custom command, because the custom command allows you to plug in a little snippet of Python code even to do something in the middle of all this stuff. So you can do practically anything with it, but it's a lot easier to use, and it has a dialog box that takes advantage of all the native dialog box capabilities, whereas modify tables is a custom dialog done with a custom dialog builder, so it just can't do as much. But again, extensions not only provide capabilities, but to some extent let people say, okay, here's stuff that's catching on, we should do more in this direction. We did the same thing with Bayesian Statistics. The latest version has, I think, a half a dozen Bayesian procedures. And they were, I wrote like 4 Bayesian procedures before I retired, and and people were very interested. So okay, let's make native procedures. Native ones are better than the ones that I did, because they were done with the full apparatus of the statistics team and the backend programmers and all that. But nevertheless, what broke the ice was, here's an extension which is easy to build. People are interested. Let's build on it. Let's improve it. Let's make it native capabilities. And so now there they are.
Yeah. Gabe, my colleague, he actually, I just had a call with him last week where he was talking about I'm pretty sure it wasn't Bayesian, because I think we actually said, it's not like this, but it's still that it's in the topical area where he works in cognitive psychology. And he said he's reading some stuff now that makes him realize, like, all the stuff they've been doing for like the last 100 years, like he's rethinking the statistics that they should be using, and that there are some new ones that actually might do a better job of being, more specific and controlling for things. But it's like you said, it's like there's this never ending, things you can add that do a better job. So him and I, because you mentioned this, I can't remember if we were in the call or not, but people in the real world, like me, working in corporate office and doing statistics, I never had time for doing, a lot of the looking at outliers, looking at all this stuff. But thankfully, I had learned using syntax and macros, so I got to do some of it, right? But I never had time to do everything I wanted to. But so I would do shortcuts, and I know there are certain statistical tests I should use, and instead of doing an Anova, I should do something different. And yet, I'm like, you know what? I think on average, it's probably, 9 out of 10 times going to give me, I'm still going to come to the same conclusion. And we were having that discussion of like, hey, if the decision you're making is $1 million decision, like it's worth that extra time to go ahead and make sure you do the right statistical test, right? But if it's all about how much time you have and how important that decision is, to put in the right amount of effort to come to that conclusion. But yeah, it's fascinating.
One of the things that that reminds me of is if people who are, when I was writing extension commands, and I did this a lot, so I knew it all kind of inside out. I could write a sophisticated statistical procedure with a custom dialog box and standard SPSS syntax and a help file and all that in a couple of days.
Yeah.
As opposed to 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
Built procedure. And that would be because I would tap an external library for the algorithm, build my own syntax. I wrote some stuff to make it easy to generate syntax and stuff. And so, you don't have, there's a learning curve there. It's not a trivial learning curve, but once you've learned it, you can be really productive. Say, I need, complicated algorithm Z. I know it's available over here, and I can incorporate it and nativize it in statistics in a couple of days, or maybe a week if it's a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that made me think about with the custom dialog boxes is the one I'm a big pusher of, not just with SPSS, but with most programs these days. You can customize your toolbar, right? You can personalize it and put in what you want. And I gotta say, on average, it's like 2% of people do it, if that. I mean, it's so rare, and yet it's like you hit. That's the one thing that like if I could tell you to talk to someone at SPSS, is put a damn button up there that has like empty the output, right? Like I make my own custom script to go make a button there to do it, but I'm like, that should be a default button on the toolbar. But I had that. I had changed decimals to 1 places, to 2 places, to 0 places, just things that I used all the time. And it was so convenient.
I've heard other people who've written syntax to clear the viewer window, but it's so easy. Click on the outline thing and press delete. It's one keystroke to clear the whole viewer. One of the nice things about the new interface that is still evolving is the ability to track from the viewer back to the syntax that produced that particular object in the viewer, tweak that syntax, rerun it, and replace the output in the viewer instead of just always putting it at the end. So, if you're trying something iteratively and going back and forth, it's a lot nicer than the other one, because it's it's right there. It's in a way it's a little bit notebook style, because you can put you can go directly from the output object to the syntax that generated it, and have the syntax rerun that syntax after tweaking, or maybe on different data, and have it replace the original output.
Yeah, that's actually where, when I'm planning to do regression, I still switch over to Systat because it has an interactive mode, and I can add a variable, take one out, add one in, and look at the model and see what's happening real quickly. And it's interactive and so easy. The other thing I love is when you run it and there's you get your outliers graph. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, but you can just look, that looks like some outliers. You can circle the ones you want to keep, right? And then it just selects them. Basically, it's like a select cases, and then rerun the stuff. And I don't have to go hunt down what that is and where it is. But it's just a really quick, easy way to like, well, what would happen if I dropped out those outliers and rerun this? And it's so fast. I wish SPSS had that as well, but I still do almost everything else. And
you can kind of approximate that. You can basically generate a data selection statement from a graph, and then you can go back, make that be your, filter command or your select command, and then rerun your syntax. But it's not as smooth.
Okay.
Click on a point and say, take it out of my equation.
Yeah, I mean, also I would, generally speaking, I have the residual values, and I would know, like, I want to drop off this level. But anyway, it's I'm curious, do you have any thoughts of like the future of SPSS? And if you don't want to comment, that's perfectly fine. I understand. But given SPSS is a paid for tool, and then you got Python and R. Actually, before we even go there, back when I looked at this is like I said around 8 years ago, Python R had a big jump on Python, but Python was really coming up strong. And I said, I think Python is going to surpass R. But I don't. Has that happened, or is it still close, or what's going on with those two?
In the data science world, there's a constant R versus Python theme. And you're right, certainly as of, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, the statistical capabilities of R were vastly greater than what was available with Python. Now it's much closer to neck and neck. And, Scikit and pandas and various other Python libraries, typically you get them through the Anaconda distribution. They're much closer to being on a par. And I just saw a survey the other day of data scientists asking, Python versus R, and it was pretty much neck and neck. I think, people say, boy, the CRAN repository has 13,000 packages. If you look at the PyPy repository, it has over 20,000. Now, they're not particularly statistical, but there are big libraries. And Spark, Spark is popular now for big data stuff. And Spark actually had a Python interface before it had an R interface. And so, I think Python, it's people have preferences. People use what they know, but I think it's certainly viable to work with either one at this point.
Okay. And then I'm curious. So, since those are both open source and free, or at least for the most part free, is SPSS? Especially SPSS for me in market research has such a stronghold, and it's also the vast majority of people in market research aren't programmers. I'm not worried about that market really, but I'm just curious if SPSS, just the pricing model, what's going to happen? Is it going to just stay as it is, you think, or any ideas of?
I don't know really where it's going to go. The product managers, think about that sort of thing a lot. But the paradigm with Python, and particularly with R, is that data analysis is programming. And I think that's the wrong paradigm for a lot of people. And in terms, if you're an advanced statistician, you're probably very good at R these days. And there's plenty of people where you could say the same thing about Python, and people who want to control exactly how a computation is done, or who really want to get into it and make control every aspect of it. Those people are going to be Python or R people, and even if they use a package like SPSS, it's not their primary tool. If they're a researcher and you want to implement a new algorithm, well, you could implement it probably in SPSS, but it's probably easier to implement it in R because there are a lot of tools there that are readily available for you. But if you're an applied person, and particularly if you're not particularly interested in programming, then a tool like SPSS or Modeler, which gives you a visual interface, is probably more appealing. Now whether that's enough to justify the price,
right.
The R is free, but R is expensive, because after you've built something complicated in R, which was probably a lot of work,
man hours,
how does it get maintained? How does it get
with expensive people?
It's expensive people, and it is. I've heard from a number of people who've built complicated applications in R, and then they're stuck. They realize that R is really not a good application, a good language for building complicated applications. It's great for statistical algorithms and graphics and certain amount of and data management now, but it's not is not necessarily a way to build. You know, there's a country where they were basically doing all their federal government tax audit stuff in R. You know, well, good luck. You know, there's so many things where R doesn't really behave the way you expect it to, or it doesn't. You know, I don't think it's a good choice there. Probably some people would disagree with me, but I think it's not. You know, it's not a good language for building complicated systems. Python is better, but still, you know, it's a different use pattern. And
Yep.
I know when there was a time when people teaching basic statistics would, you know, have to confront, well, okay, I can do something simple with point and click to teach people statistics, whether it's SPSS or another friendly package, or, you know, I can make them learn R in order to do this calculation, and it would bog them down. So, you know, where this will settle, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know where IBM will go. You
Yeah.
know, IBM is, you know, has gone big into the data science experience and new modeler interfaces and Watson and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Is proprietary. So I don't know, you know, I don't know where it will wind up. But one thing that's clear that there will be a lot more choices than there used to be.
Agreed. And that's one I talk to, usually now I talk to smaller businesses, and they keep hearing data science. They want to start doing stuff. And I'm like, well, that's where, generally speaking, you got to have a good amount of data. You know, it's called big data for a reason, and you need, for a lot of the relationships, you need some decent data. That was, incidentally, the other thing when I started switching over from working in market research to where actually at TI, I switched from, I left research and I moved into internet marketing, and I worked in their email and marketing database. And so I started dealing with much bigger volume. You know, before I'd have, 500 respondents if I was lucky. And then I moved to 1 million rows or more. And it took me a while to stop cursing SPSS, because I was used to running executables every time I did anything. And then I realized what a blessing it was that you didn't have to, you could do a bunch of stuff before you actually, run your command that actually reads the data file and processes it. But I had to go back and redo a lot of my macros that I had previously. Every time I'm like, it didn't matter. It was so fast. But it was a good experience. I'm glad I learned it. But yeah, it was I never understood it before, of why you don't just run it, every time. And I'm like, now I get it. But yeah. Awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to bring up?
Well, I was just going to say, SPSS comes with its own user interface, whether you like it or not. It's there and you can use it when you like. People who use Python or R, it's really important, in my opinion, that they get an IDE or something, that makes it easier
Absolutely.
to work in that language. I use the Wing IDE for Python, which I love, and I've used it for, I don't know, probably more than 10 years. And it actually allows me even to debug inside SPSS code, not the native code, but Python code. Or with R, now there's RStudio, which makes R, tames it much more than it used to be. But you really need one of those tools or something equivalent to them in order to be productive in those languages, in my opinion. Some people really like to, a bare console and a keyboard.
Yeah.
But for me, anyway, I think having an IDE, that you can use, whether you're working with statistics with it or whether you're doing something, totally Python or R based without anything else. I think those are critical tools for being productive and reducing the headache and the brain strain of trying to get something right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even just it's not, the IntelliSense where it's offering up words is nice, but the color coding alone, for me, it gives you such quick, easy ways to realize, hey, oh, that's misspelled, right? That why isn't my descriptive command actually, blue or whatever color it's supposed to be? Little things like that. I agree. Actually, let me share, by the way, let me share my screen here. And let me show you one. So for years with AutoHotkey, and this is Cite, by the way. This is the editor I used to use for AutoHotkey and for Python. And I used to, by the way, years ago, before when we said like people complained about SPSS's editor, I used Notepad++. I think it was. I was able to execute commands with it in SPSS from Notepad++. Anyway,
I use Notepad++ for stuff, not with SPSS, but yeah, I like that editor.
Yeah. So in AutoHotkey, they have these things called hot strings. And basically what you can do is you can tell it, like, actually, if I type I'll do my email address. So JGE period. Now when I hit space, oh, of course it doesn't work. Let's try this. Oh, I need JGM period space. So it dumps in my email address, right? So for SPSS, if I was in, it works in any Windows editor. It doesn't matter if I'm in SPSS or not. But like for my, this is my correlation macro, which I already have defined. And I just know, oh, here's my start variable and my end variable, right? And so that's what I put there. Or I can say, so that is for doing my descriptives, right? So anything, and it can be paragraphs, right? It can be whatever you want, but I can type a couple letters and up comes my template for, using my procedure with exactly how I want it, right? And that's where I have a lot of my macros. Of course, so that's my describer macro. And so I just dump in my variable names here and I can put in a title and then change the order, ascending or descending. But it allowed me to be so productive. A combination of course, I can, like, this one isn't a macro, right? It's just a straight up command. Right. But typically I had my macros defined, and then I could just type a couple letters and up comes my command, dump in the variables I want. Actually, let me see if I can fire up SPSS real quickly and show you one other one I wrote that I wish there was a way to do this in SPSS, an easier way. SPSS starts real slow on my computer.
Yeah.
I won't blame you, though.
It reminds me that the latest round of stuff from Google is now kind of insistent on completing your sentences, and it's amazing how
oh yeah,
it
is.
But it also, like, on my iPad, I would never write code on the iPad because it's always trying to correct my spelling of variable.
Right.
Wrong.
Right.
And sometimes there's too much help. Okay, so what are you doing here?
So this is my command that.
Get rid of that include. You should be using insert. Include is
really
for 10 years.
Wow. So can I actually use insert right here? Is that what you're saying?
Insert is a command that pretty much replaces include. It has a whole bunch of nice options, and it's smarter. And it's nobody should use include anymore.
Answer this for me real quickly. I mean, I can test it, but I know in an include there were these very not archaic, but rules of your command had to start on the first line, and then anything beneath it had to be indented.
Yeah. You don't have to do that with insert.
Oh, I'm switched right now. Then I will switch tomorrow because I always go back and remember this stuff. But let me see. So this is a survey I did for a company years ago that the condition was that, like, it's not privileged data, so I can pop it open, but it doesn't look like it actually. So that for whatever reason that insert didn't. Yeah, it didn't quite work yet, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So now I have.
Anyway.
Here's my data file.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can highlight, like, these are a bunch of variables, right? I'm going to hit copy. Now, if I come back into here, if I hit paste, of course, it's going to put all of them, right? But I have it where if I hit Control G, oh, sorry, wrong one. It's Control. Let me go back. Copy. You know what? Sometimes the SPSS editor acts up, so there we go. So see how it took the first variable, put in some spaces, put the word to, and then put in the last variable, right? So I love that to command and just being able to jump right between, because that's actually what I would put into here.
Yeah, and the GUIs in SPSS never paste the to construct, which is kind of a shame. It'd be nice to, but they, make it easy to create whole pick lists of stuff, but they won't.
Yeah.
They won't do this. But of course, then that macro, that extension command that I was mentioning, SPSS select variables, will do, kind of take the place of this if you want. And an extension command you can use too in variable lists. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No. So yeah, I love the idea where you were talking about that, where I could, because that was one thing I also do was I would create a group. I would use a macro to create a list of these variables, and then I would just reference that definition in my call commands, because I realized I used this for like descriptives and then for means, and I would just throw in my independent variable, and it was easy because I could just reference one thing and it would be my groups of stuff. But I'll have to look at what you're describing with I can define attributes or something you're saying?
Well, the select variables extension command allows you to construct a list and you can use a to in that, and it builds a macro for you. But that can be based on the variable names, patterns in the variable names, all the variable names that contain age, or it can be based on standard attributes like measurement level, or variable type, numeric or string, or it can reference custom attributes that you've created in your data set. So if you had a custom attribute called demographic, then you could use that command. Give me a macro that lists all of the variables that have the custom attribute demographic.
Yeah. Well, in the thing I was telling you about earlier, where I'm using the API to connect to it, I'm defining everything. I'll look at what you're talking about, because I know like these are all like here. You'll see I start mine with a common core and then apply the specific to it, and that's I love that. Actually, what I do is even I have the question number now. This is an older data set, but I'll look at what you're talking about, because I would love to be able to reference that instead of having in my syntax to go define these groups.
And it generalizes your job, and it cuts down your error probabilities, and just makes life a little better.
Yeah, awesome. But yeah, anyway, so I loved using Hot. The other one, by the way, this is a free tool. It only works on a Windows computer, but for things I don't use as frequently, there's this other tool. You can build menus, right, and dump in. So here's my syntax. Let me do statistics, and then here is, let's see, my actually this is for a systat command. Let me pick one SPSS one. So it's the same concept as the hot strings, but I have a GUI, right? And I can put in icons, and these are basically all snippets of code. And so I can very quickly add something to this list, and then it'll get sent to whatever editor you're in. It's kind of like the custom dialog box, except for you're calling up whatever command, and it's super easy. Like if I want to add something, I can come in here to settings and go, oh, here's my statistics menu, and I'm going to add a snippet. You can add shortcuts to folders or other things and applications. I'm going to add a snippet. And let's make it easier to identify. So we'll put in a different icon for it, and I'll save it and reload it. This just takes a second here. And now, let me go to the next line. When I hit my button, go under statistics, and here's the Jon test, right? And I can click it, and there it is, right? So it's super fast to add to. And this is what I like. I have a bunch of stuff for my AutoHotkey coding, but I also have stuff for SPSS and for Systat and for Tableau also, because I work in that. And by the way, have you ever created like a Tableau file based off of research data?
I haven't. I've played with Tableau a little bit, but
It is a nightmare. It Tableau wants its data structured very differently than like a flat file. Like, you know, if you want to graph it a certain way in Tableau, it took me quite a while to get that down to how to build the data file the way you want it. But yeah, anyway, it's so I have reminders for that. Anyway, it's called Quick Access Pop-up. It's written in AutoHotkey, but it's a free tool, or I forget what it's called. You can donate if you want to. You can make the other really cool thing while I'm here is if you were either opening or saving a file. So like if I was opening a file, but I'm like, oh, it's in this like network drive that I access a lot, I can hit my button and say, oh, it's in this folder, my AutoHotkey work folder. It will detect that this open file window is open, and watch what happens when I click it. So it'll detect I'm in there and navigate to that folder.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so especially like when I worked at a corporate world, you'd have these really nested, you know, network drives you're trying to access, and then you just build a shortcut to it. And whether you're opening or saving a file, you could just hit that button, and it'll detect that that window's open. And if it's not open, like actually if that wasn't open and I still hit this, I'll hit that same one. It'll open Explorer, probably in another other window. But it opens. It'll say, oh, there's no open or saved window open. Let's open the folder. You know, in your default, if you use a different like Command Explorer or anything else, it'll use that. But yeah, it's a pretty cool, easy, free tool. Like I said, I love teaching people how to be more efficient, and that's what I love doing. And it's one thing is like even people who code, I'm like, man, you can save time. You can be much more efficient in coding. Because you know you have to go hunt down that template you had, right? Where you did that one thing, and finding it can be, you know, time consuming.
Well, I should tell you about another extension command that you might find interesting.
Yeah.
Called Stats Open Project, and it provides basically a project file where you can define macros, code, data sets, syntax files, and things. And you can set it so it automatically opens this project when you start statistics. And so you have your standard libraries of stuff that you always want to use. You can do that, and then you can have sub-projects, and you can have sub-projects that reference other sub-projects. And so it sets up your working environment basically automatically, instead of having to go through and open all these files and do that sort of thing. It actually uses some of the scripting under the covers, and it doesn't do everything I'd like it to do because there's just some limitations in what was possible. But I use it all the time, so when I start a system, it has a lot of things predefined for me, especially for macros. If you don't have to remember to insert a macro library or what have you. You can just have it automatically open that library when you start the file.
Yeah, in this tool, it's sort of similar. You can group things together. So I could put a bunch of things under one, and I click the button, and it goes and opens all of those files or runs programs or whatever. But I'll have to look at that. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, so it doesn't have a really nice user interface, because it wasn't possible. But but anyway, it does save me a lot of time.
Yeah, and that's what to me, that's what it's all about, right? Is whatever, and that's what like I talk to people who use different editors, and they ask, well, which one is the best? I'm like, it's up to you, right? And that's for AutoHotkey. One of the things I love about it is I define when I'm typing these like abbreviations, like Joe. This is for Joe G Mail. Like it makes sense to me, right? And that's what I love about it, is it's easy for me to remember because I define what I type and then what it will replace it with. So it's intuitive because I've defined it myself. But yeah, it again, it's like it's whatever works for whoever's doing what. And what I get bad is, like you said, like which is everybody, is like you get stuck in a way of doing things. And this is why I like having these calls too. And I have monthly AutoHotkey webinars teaching people stuff. And what's awesome is I learn stuff at those calls, right? And it's great because I'm teaching something at the same time. I learn little things. You're like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. And it's I'm the forever student. I love to learn.
Well, this is the right place.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to cover?
We could probably talk for days, but we probably exhausted the patience of anybody watching this by now anyway.
Right. There'll be some, I think, because I do have some people that follow me that get an SPSS, and I was thinking if you're okay with it, I'll post this up into like the SPSS power users group on LinkedIn and the other SPSS users group, because I think some people will be interested, right?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Because it's been an honor. I'll say it again. I mean, to me, you're like the biggest rock star. You and Reynold Levesque, is that how you say his name?
Levesque.
Okay.
Ray has long since disappeared. I don't know whether he retired, and before long he basically stopped participating. But he was a great guy, and he was a great Python enthusiast also.
I still have. I'm still sharing my screen, right?
Yeah.
On my homepage here. So these are links to his. I know it's not his. There's another guy running it who actually I corresponded with him a couple times, but I have several links on my homepage to the syntax and macros and scripts, where I learned so much also from those and borrowed and stole and adapted and tweaked.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really glad that like someone actually took it over, because I have all these, stored, but it's like I don't know where. That's the one thing I'll say. When I try to go to the IBM SPSS site, like maybe it's gotten better in the last couple of years, but about 9 years ago, it was like after IBM took it over, it was the hardest thing for me to find like anything at the time.
Well, there's been a lot of work done on it, but I'm not thrilled with it at this point. But at least it provides forums and you can find fix packs, and you can find products. It does the basics.
Yeah.
Where it will go, who knows?
Yeah. Well, awesome, John. It was great talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's an honor to get to meet you and talk to you. And I learned, now you got me doing a lot of homework now. I'm gonna have to go learn what was what was insert. I definitely got to check that out. But thank you so much.
It's been fun to talk. Nice to see you face to face, and good luck with things.
Thanks, John. All right, have a good evening.